How do we know if our spiritual experiences are actually from God? How do we know that we are experiencing the capital S Spirit of God and not like self-delusion or social pressures or our own imagination or anything other than God? So for the past 2 weeks, we've been talking about how we perceive God, and specifically I've shown these famous brain scans here, of these scans of neural representations of faith, like how the brain perceives God. And we talked about how the brain perceives God in really two different ways. One is the lower one, the doctrinal one, the way of knowing, the way of trivia, the way of facts. Like everyone, like when you say God, you have this box of facts and trivia that you know about God, who He is, what you think about God. And we said that's the same whether you're an atheist, unreligious, irreligious, whatever you categorize yourself, or a religious person. We all have facts, things we know about God. But there's this other area that is more developed for those who are people of faith. In fact, it can develop more and more over time. The more you experience God, the more you worship, the more you pray, the more you meditate, this actually grows. And it's largely non-verbal, experiential, like things you can't put into words. But there's a sense in which a true believer can truly feel the presence of God, even if they cannot put it into words. That a non-religious person might know the exact same facts, might know even more about God, but a believer knows God the way you know what it feels like to dip your toe in cold water or get that giant hug from your over-perfumed aunt. Like, that's the way we know God. Now, the weakness, of course, with these scans is that at a neurological level, that person, that brain might be a person burning incense to Buddha, going into the Scientologist headquarters, or sitting in a pew, or sitting in your seat. At a neurological level, you can't really tell the difference between any of these. Like, that shows you what's happening inside the brain, a neural representation of the faith, but it says nothing about the quality of the faith. It says nothing about whether you believe something real or you believe something imaginary. So let's just get concrete for a minute. If we were to take this music stand and say, this is a sacred music stand, and you were to all go home and like take a little picture of it, hang it on your wall, and every day you pray to the music stand and you meditate on the music stand and you come to the music stand in your times of desperation and you practice, you join a small group of people who all share the love for the music stand, and you do that over a long period of time, we have every reason to believe that your brain would look exactly like that. We have every reason to believe that you would have the physiological and neurological and social benefits of someone who has real faith, true faith. So you see the problem here. If faith basically looks and feels the same, whether you're a Buddhist in Cambodia or a Christian in Phoenixville, how do we know what's real? How do we know what's authentic? How do we know we've got the real thing? And this is the question for today. How do we know what's real? Now, when we go back to the first century and start looking for answers in the scriptures, you will find no brain scans, not even in the back of the Bible where there's pictures. It's not in there. There's no reference to this. This is pre-modern, pre-scientific. But there were, at the time, all sorts of competing claims to knowledge of God, spiritual knowledge, and spiritual experience. People saying, I had a true experience of my God. People saying they had true knowledge of the universe. All kinds of competing things out there for that. And so for the past few weeks, we've watched in 1 Corinthians 12 and now going into 13, where the Apostle Paul paints this picture for us. This is going to give us greater clarity of how do we know how do we grow in awareness of God was the first question. How do we grow in the awareness and that it's the true God, not just one of the gods in ancient Corinth as he was talking about, but the true God. And this is the first thing, the starting point, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, is that knowledge of God, experience of God, really knowing that we know the true God starts with the confession, Jesus is Lord. That religion in and of itself is not the answer. Spirituality is not the answer. That religion and spirituality, no matter how sincere, no matter how ancient, no matter how many people follow it, no matter how beautiful it might seem to you, religion, if it does not embrace the person and work of Jesus Christ, it's not the way. It's not the way. God has revealed himself in the person of Jesus. It's got to start there. And then he builds on that, though. Authentic faith, though, is not just confessing Jesus is Lord, although it's much more than a confession. But it's experiential, and we spent the next 2 weeks unpacking what that means, that we are supposed to serve using our gifts, that God has gifted us to serve and all fit together, connect together. There's this embodied faith that we experience Jesus in one another. In this space that we hear, I hear Jesus' words on your lips. You feel him in my embrace. We are the hands and feet of Jesus, that we know him experientially, non-verbally. And the Apostle Paul ties both those together, but I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but it turns out that in ancient Corinth, some of the people who showed up to church were fake. Shocking, I know. Fake Christians. But it appears that some of the people there, they acted super spiritual, and they're having all kinds of crazy, supernatural experiences. But the Apostle Paul's like, something doesn't smell right. Like something doesn't work. You know what I mean? You open the fridge, you're like, something's wrong in there, something's rotten. Like you say you're having all this spiritual knowledge and all these spiritual experiences, and you've met God, great. But there's something that's not working. So he's going to take us today, and he's going to say, let's differentiate between, okay, it's true, God might do something crazy and experiential in your life, but sometimes you're just crazy. So how do we know when it's a crazy work of God, and how do we know when you're just crazy? How do we know what's real? So our text for today is going to be 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and it is famous. This is the love chapter. This is a chapter like you can hardly make it through a wedding without someone pulling this thing out. It has been on like more Instagram posts, like coffee mugs and like those Chip and Joanna gang chalkboards than you can imagine. Right? This is the love chapter, but it might be a little meatier than just a little love poem. Let's check this out. We're going to start one verse before where Paul preps this in chapter 12, verse 31. So if you will, we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31. You can follow along in your text, or I'll have the key text up here. Apostle Paul starts like this. He says, now eagerly desire the greater gifts. Now, we're not exactly sure what that means. There's lots of theories, but we do know this. Last week, the Apostle Paul was talking about there are all these types of gifts. And yes, some of them are crazy and from God, and like you can't even explain them. And here, all we know, what we can safely say about what he's saying here is that you should desire them. Like speaking in tongues, prophecy, miracles, seeing God show up in ways you can't imagine. Yes. Yeah, that's good. And yet, I will show you the most excellent way. In Greek, this was originally written and penned in what's called Koine Greek. And so in Greek, that word most excellent, the most excellent way, is the word where we get we get the English word hyperbole. Hyperbole, okay? He says, I'm going to show you the hyperbolic way, the hyperbole way, which literally, figuratively means over the top, to say something above and beyond, to say something in a way that is just completely over super abundant. So figuratively, this would mean, and yeah, I'm going to show you the most excellent way. I'm going to show you the best way you can possibly imagine, even greater than the greatest gifts you can imagine. That's what that means figuratively. Literally, it would mean I'm going to show you the way over the top. Like literally over the top, like it's picturing a mountain, like a mountain path that you go. You would use this word. In fact, this word, when you talk about the word way or road, and you couple it with hyperbole, when you look in the ancient Greek text, you find it's almost always a literal meaning that the Apostle Paul wants us in some sense to picture. I'm going to show you not just the best way, but the higher way. It might be a harder way, but it's also the better way. All right, so with that image in mind, let's get to the text. He says, chapter 13, verse 1, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal." So this is going to be important here. Ancient Corinth was a famous metalworking town. Corinthian brass was world famous. In fact, there's all kinds of speculation on what it exactly was. They think it was some metal alloy, possibly, or some special technology that none of the rest of the world knew about, a way of treating bronze to make it shine. And it was considered like the most precious metal, more precious in the ancient world than gold. Like, this is the stuff. Like, if you had an object out of Corinthian brass, it would be in a palace or in the temple. In fact, if you read through the book of Acts, you'll read a story about a man who is being carried. He's like a cripple. He's being carried to the gate called Beautiful. You know what the gate called Beautiful was? In Jerusalem, in the temple, this gate that was on the eastern wall. So when the sun shone, it reflected the light. You know what it was made out of? Corinthian brass. Like, this is the doorway to the king. It must be the very best thing. So my point is that was big, big business in ancient Corinth, metalworking. And as was the case, all metalwork at this time was done by hand in the Corinthian markets, which were in the center of town. So these hand-worked traditional guys were literally banging on metal all day long. I have a little clip just to give you a sense. This still happens today, to show you what this might have looked and felt and sounded like. Yeah, you get the idea. So when the Apostle Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels and do not have love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, it's important to note that he's not talking about musical instruments here. It literally translates, I'm only a hunk of brass or a clanging brass bowl. I'm bang, 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 bang. That's what all of them would have experienced every day walking through ancient Corinth. The point being, this noise, this gift that you think is so high, speaking in tongues, the Corinthians thought that was the pinnacle of spiritual experience, of spiritual knowledge. I'm truly spiritual if I speak in tongues. He says, if you do that without love, you are a clanging hunk of brass, a clanging brass bowl. It's, in today's terms, it's when your neighbor decides to start their weed eater at 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday. It's when your friend decides to give your child a toy drum set. It's not just loud, it's not just indistinct, it's annoying. Annoying. If I have the gift of prophecy and I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, like I know everything there is to know, and if I have faith that can move mountains, like I can perform miracles on call, and I can like raise people from the dead, and I can do everything that you could imagine. I have spiritual powers. But do not have love, I am nothing. Do you hear that? He doesn't say, I have nothing, I can do nothing, I know nothing. He says, I am nothing. If I give all my possessions to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, if I make Mother Teresa look like, oh, she's selfish, right? If I'm heroic, if I'm the most sacrificial, most devout, most pious person you've ever met, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Nothing. It's empty. It's a gong. It's nothing. It's nothing. So there's a little Latin phrase, sine qua non. Do you guys know this one? It's a helpful little phrase that pops up from time to time. Sine qua non. It literally could translate something like without which nothing. So if you're going to make, let's make chocolate chip cookies, all right? And like you're halfway through, you got the oven preheated, you're mixing things, and then you realize you don't have chocolate chips. Well, you can make cookies, but you can't make chocolate chip cookies, right? Without chocolate chips, you do not have a chocolate chip cookie. It is essential. They define it. Without them, you do not have them. It's sine qua non. What the Apostle Paul is saying here is that without love, like all your spiritual knowledge, all your spiritual experiences, all your church attendance, all your religious acts, all your giving, all your Bible verses, all your prayer, all your times where you felt moved with God, all of this without love, it's nothing. It's nothing. Love is the without which nothing of the life of God. Or to put it otherwise, spirituality without love is spirituality without God. Okay, so let's talk for a minute. Paul uses this word, I think, very intentionally here, nothing. Let's talk a minute about nothing. A theology of nothing. Okay, so can I say I've studied you guys over the last few years, and I know that about 10 to 20% of you are going to eat this up. You're going to take notes. You're going to read books on it. We're going to want to talk later. And about 80% are going to be like, what just happened? So if you're in the 80%, just hang on. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this in about 3 minutes. But this is too good to just skim over here. So Christian Theology 101. There's a bit of trivia for your cognitive part of your brain here. We believe that God is not only the creator of all things, but the sustainer of all things. So Colossians 1:16 through 17, in him, referring to Jesus, in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Like they have their being. Like his will holds the universe, reality itself together. Now, maybe we could take this too far, but there's something to this, that he's the sustainer of all things. We do not believe in a deistic God who sets the clock going and walks away, that he's in it and under it. He's holding all things together. So, big idea here. Existence itself, reality as we know it, is dependent somehow on Jesus. If he ceased to will our existence, we would not exist. Which begs the question that people have been asking for years and years and years. If God creates all things and in some sense wills the existence of all things, what about evil? Did God create evil? And the Bible's really, really clear on this. No, that's not, no. And 1 Timothy 4:4 is everything God created is good, which begs the question then, where did evil come from? And this is where you get into a very, very important theology of nothing. You see, guys like Augustine and Aquinas point out that evil is not a thing. You can't point to something and be like, that's evil. It's an evil rock. Evil tree, evil platypus. Things are not evil. Everything God created is good. The evil is not a thing, it's a perversion of a good thing. So we take human ingenuity, creativity, right? That's a good thing. And then we study and we learn and we discover the strong and weak nuclear forces. That's a good thing that God created. And then we take our ingenuity, our creativity, and this new discovery about a good thing that God made, and we create something, a way of splitting the atom that can now demolish entire cities in an instant. And that is not a good thing. So we take human sexuality. It's a good thing. It's from God. But when you use it in a manner that's selfish, hurtful, or abusive, that is not good. So we take a good thing and we pervert it. Evil is not a thing. It's a perversion of a thing. That there is nothing evil about the forces of nature or about sex. But when we use them in ways that they were never created to be used, that is evil. So in a theological sense, evil is nothing. In a theological sense, there's a sense in which it has no reality, that it does not fit in the will of God. And that, get this picture, becoming more and more evil is to move away from reality, is become less and less like reality that God declares that he is held together in the very being of Jesus. So if you want a popular example of this, C.S. Lewis in his book, The Great Divorce, gives a picture of this. Heaven is reality. It's hard. It's substantive. It's real. And hell is the shadow land. You're a shadow of yourself. And the longer you're in hell, the less and less real you become. That's the picture of it. So in life, though, evil then, again, evil is believing a false definition of good, true, and beautiful. It's making up your own meaning, creating your own reality. So when we reject God's reality and replace it with our own, what we do is we live a fiction. Like God didn't declare it that way, but we live that way. So it's a fiction. It's an imaginary world, and we create an imaginary self. A self that does not exist, a false self, a shadow self. So to get more concrete, we just sang a song, I am who you say I am. So, in God's reality, I am a child of God. I am valued not because of what I've done, or because of what I have, or because of who I know. I'm valued because He values me, period. I'm not valued because I'm good. I'm valued because He is good. That's where my value comes from. Now, if I reject this and I reject who God says I am, then I have to create my own value. So I say, who am I? I'm valuable because of my education, or my money, or my spirituality, or my devotion, or the things I do, or the people I know, or my sense of humor, or because I'm so, ecologically sensitive, or I don't know. People make up all kinds of things, all kinds of fictions about who they are. But God doesn't know anything about those. Those are false. Those are not real if they're separated from who God says you are. The Apostle Paul says, when we do that, when I do that, I am nothing. That version of me has no substance. It is not real. So Thomas Merton, the late, I think he was Trappist, a monk, author, fairly brilliant, fairly hard to read, but some of you might find him interesting. He has this quote that I just always been catchy to me. He describes it this way. He says, every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. That is the man that I want myself to be, but who cannot exist because God does not know anything about him. And to be unknown by God is altogether too much privacy. He goes on to say, my false and private self is the one who wants to exist outside the reach of God's will and God's love, outside of reality, outside of life. And such a self cannot help but be an illusion. It's a mirage. It's a vapor that at the end of the time will completely vanish. The I that I construct literally exists only in my mind. God knows nothing of that person. It will literally just disappear at the end of time. So what is real, what is substantive, is inseparably linked to God. What is real, what is substantive, what the reality of the universe, who God is and what He wills into existence is inseparably linked to God. And the Apostle Paul is going to give us a word to describe that reality. Love. Love. So in verses 4 through 7, he's now going to define in some way love for us, what he means by love. Let's just read this. It says, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. That's love. Now, in 2018 America, we run into a little bit of a problem here when we come to this text. Love in America 2018 is a very, very generic word. So I love pad thai, and I love books, and I love Craig Heitha, and I love, a Sunday afternoon nap, and I love my wife, right? All of those things. We say, I love those things. And hopefully you understand there's some difference between, me loving pad time and how I love my wife. But we don't have any words to distinguish that. In ancient Greek, it's not exactly the same. And some of you have probably stumbled upon this. There's at least 4 words that they would commonly use for love: storge, philia, eros, and agape. And so storge is going to be this familial love, and then Philadelphia, right? Brotherly friendship love. Eros is sexual or erotic love, and agape is unconditional love. So let's unpack it this way. It's your birthday. It's your birthday, and so Storge says, you know what? Let's have a party, and let's invite the whole family. Not because you like them, you don't. But their family, you love them. Storge. And Philia says, you know what? It's your birthday. Let's get together and do something. Let's make a cake together. That'd be great. Eros says, I want to eat you like a piece of cake. Extra whipped cream. Agape says, I want what's truly good for you. Truly good, period. Without condition, without expiration. I want what's truly good for you. Now I'm going to ask you, can you guess which word the Apostle Paul is using here when he talks about love? Yeah, it's agape. It is a selfless love, or better, a self-giving love. A love that seeks the good of the other. A love that is at the very center of the life of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God in community, who's connected with love, constantly self-giving, selfless, other-exalting, self-giving, so much so that they love each other so much that you say there's not 3 gods, there's one God, 3 persons, one God. It's the love that brings together a couple. It's not erotic love that makes 2 one flesh. It is agape in marriage that can bring together people because it's a self-giving love. That love, the Apostle Paul, forms reality itself. It's the basis of the universe. It is uncreated reality. But I want you to notice in that list that we just went through, the Apostle Paul doesn't say a single thing about how this love feels. Not a single thing. He doesn't say, love is like just something that happens to you and it makes you feel warm and fuzzy and it might just go away. Like you could fall in or fall out of love. He doesn't suggest that at all. In fact, when he talks about agape love, he uses 15 verbs to describe it. He doesn't talk about what love feels like. He talks about what love does. And I'm not saying that he's opposed to what it feels like, because the Apostle Paul clearly, deeply, passionately loves God and loves people. It's all over his letters. He's a wreck of a man who's like weeping for people and worshiping passionately God. He does feel something, but he says that's not the ultimate measure of agape love. If you want to know love, you need to know what love does. So he gives us 15 things that love does. Let's look at the list. Love is patient. This is literally the slapping together of 2 words that says far away and anger. The love keeps anger far away. It puts it far away. It doesn't like blow up on people. Even if they deserve it, it doesn't do that because it's not loving. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is gentle. It is generous. It does not envy. It does not want another person's position or possessions. It does not covet thy neighbor's wife or house or manservant or maidservant or donkey. Car today. It doesn't want that. It wants what's best for you. It does not boast, and this is the sense of self-importance. It doesn't say, hey, look at me. Everything's got to be about me. It is not proud. Now, this one's worth pausing on. It literally means puffed up. So have any of you guys seen there's a famous TEDx talk and a few books now on power poses? Do you know what I'm talking about? Amy Cuddy, you should check it out, TEDx. So there's power poses. There is now ample research to show that body language actually shapes physiologically and sociologically how people view you and how you view yourself. It actually measurably changes you inside and outside. And so she recommends doing power poses. I showed this video to the staff and to my daughter. My daughter literally, before she has a quiz or a test, she'll go in the bathroom and stand like this. 2 minutes and you're a new person. What do you think I do before I preach? My favorite iteration of this is there's a book by Jordan Peterson called The 12 Rules for Life. And his number one rule, the first rule of life, he says, is stand up straight with your shoulders back. And then he goes on at length to talk about lobsters. Lobsters, by which I mean those like delicious crustaceans. Yeah. So lobsters, when they get in a fight, the two lobsters fighting. And then whichever one wins will then puff up, make itself big. And that will actually release, I don't know, I guess serotonin or something in its body. And it will not only physiologically change the lobster itself, the lobster will now sociologically change. All the other lobsters will treat it as a dominant lobster, a head lobster. The other lobster shrinks in on itself. And the same things happen, right? Stress levels increase, and other lobsters treat it as it is. Loser. So the point being, as it goes with lobsters, so it goes with people. And there's actually some good research on this. And now let me say, I'm not trying to squash your inner lobster right now. But please hear this. Love, agape love, it is about strength. It is about confidence. It is about assurance. It is about knowing who you are and that you are valued. But love is not puffed up. Love is not trying to dominate other people. Love is being big for other people, not being big against or over or dominating other people. Love is not proud. It does not dishonor others. This is a rather sanitized translation here. It literally could be translated like it doesn't do shameful, lewd, indecent acts. So chapter 5, it does not sleep with its dad's girlfriend. Love doesn't do that. Chapter 11, love does not dress up like a prostitute and then get up on stage at church. It doesn't do that. That's not loving. It is not self-seeking. It transcends the ego. It does not insist on its own way. It does not easily anger. It's not irritable. It's not resentful. It keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't, when something happens in a relationship, it doesn't immediately get historical. You know what I mean? Not hysterical, but historical. Oh, you always do this. Remember the last 25 times you did this. That's not love. Love does not delight in evil. It doesn't enjoy it. It doesn't find pleasure in it. It doesn't find it entertaining, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. This is the idea of covering. Same word could be cover or contain. So it's the language that would be used of a roof or maybe a container, also a boat. Literally, you could say love doesn't leak. When the storms of life come, you're going to cover someone. You're going to cover them. You're not going to let them get hit. You're not going to let them get soaked. You're going to cover them. It protects. It always trusts. It never loses faith in God. It always hopes. It knows that there's nothing that can take away its sure hope in Jesus, and it always perseveres. This is a beautiful word, hupomeno. It means to remain under. It's the picture of Mary, who follows Jesus because of love to the cross, and she remains under the cross to her great, great suffering. She joins him in the suffering. Why? Because she loves him. Love does that. And the marriage clause, this is the for worse part of the for better, for worse. It says, I am not going anywhere. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how fat you get, no matter how ugly you get, no matter how poor we get, I am not going anywhere. I'm going to remain under with you. That's love. Now, two things I want you to notice about this list. When we look at, it's patient, does not envy, boast, all the negatives and positives here. When we go through this list, the first thing I want you to notice is that if you invert this list and trade the word love for Corinth, you find that this is a pretty good description of the Corinthians. The Corinthians are not patient. They're not kind. They are envious, boastful, proud, dishonoring others, self-seeking, easily angered, blah, 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 blah. This is like, in fact, if you go chapter by chapter through 1 Corinthians up to this point, you'll find almost every one of those words was leveled against them as an accusation prior to this point. So this is very particular to the Corinthian church. The second thing I want you to notice is that if you take this list and you swap out the word love for Jesus, it's a pretty good description of Jesus. Jesus is patient. Man, he's patient. He's kind, like a bruised reed, the text says, in a smoldering wick. Isaiah the prophet describes him as like you're like a smoldering wick, like your life's about to burn out, but he's not going to snuff you out. He's going to reignite that flame. He is kind. He is gentle. He doesn't envy. He doesn't boast. He's not self-seeking. He's not about himself. He did not come to be served, but to serve. He laid down his life for us. He's sacrificial. This is a picture of Jesus. And now this contrast between the super spiritual Corinthians, who make a big bunch of noise about how great they are through their super spiritual gifts and all their spiritual knowledge over here, and Jesus and his life, and his humility, and his patience, and his way of love. The contrast, that seems to be the point of this text. That the Apostle Paul is like, do you want to know what's real? Like, if you want to know what real spirituality looks like, what's really from God, a real work of God is measured by love. Loving like Jesus, not by your knowledge, not by how much you've done, not by your extraordinary experiences. God's not impressed. It's by love. And this love, it never fails. Literally, it's the word falls. It's the same word in chapter 10 where he says, so if you're thinking that you stand firm, be careful that you do not fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. So if you think you're standing, be careful that you don't fall. It's the same language. And he says this, love, though. Love never falls. I want you to put this together. I want you to hear what he's saying. Love never falls into sin. So let's think about this. Love and sin, for the Apostle Paul, never come together. The way of love and the way of sin are utterly opposed to one another. So you can't be like, oh, he's such a sinner, but he's so loving. Like, that doesn't make any sense to the Apostle Paul. They're opposed. It's like saying you're going north and going south at the same time. You can't. It's impossible to walk in love and fall in sin. To say, I love God and then live in sin means something seriously, seriously wrong. And I want you to hear this, because love for the Apostle Paul is not just some feeling. It is a way of life, living in relationship with God. Love is the very essence of who God is, and it's living in relationship with him. And sin is just the rejection of love. So it's like saying, I love you, but I don't love you. Perhaps in a way that's, if not more helpful, at least more direct, John the Apostle writes these words, and I want to share these with you. I want to be careful with these, but when I was in high school, I got to a place where I was really involved in church, and one time we had a youth Sunday. I actually preached. First time I'd ever preached. And so I was headed leading this youth group and all this. And so I knew probably more than any other student about the Bible in our youth group. And I was doing things, religious things. So I had the knowledge down, I had the experience. And can I tell you, I was living in sin. And it was at that time, I remember reading these very words, and it cut me through like a knife. And I hope it does the same to you. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands, is a liar. The truth's not in that person. Like if you say you love Jesus, but you don't obey Jesus, you're a liar. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we're in him. Anyone who claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. That love and sin are completely opposed to each other. If you want to know God, it's about love. And love is about obedience. You can't separate it from what you do. It's not just a feeling. Love never falls into sin. It never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. And where there are tongues, they will be stilled. And where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Like all those things that the Corinthians thought were such big deals, those experiences, they're going to go away. For we know in part and prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. This is referring to when Jesus rips open the sky and shows up. You don't need a communion table anymore when you're having supper with Jesus. You don't need it. Like all these things, they're just partial compared to what we will experience. And then he goes on to talk about this is what spiritual maturity is. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Like, when I was a new Christian, he said, I thought just like you guys did. I thought that it was all about these experiences, and like if I got a theological degree, and if I spoke in tongues, and if I could prophesy, and if I could do miracles, that would make me somebody. And then I grew, I matured in my faith, and I realized that those things mean nothing without love. Love is the measure of spiritual maturity, period. For now we only see a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. For I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. So at this time, here's an example. Ancient Corinth, they used the bronze, Corinthian bronze, and other metals. They would shine it and make mirrors. So here's an actual mirror from that time period, they think actually, from Corinth. And these mirrors, it's interesting because they have tons and tons of examples of them. I was going to show you more ornate ones, but they were all so sexually explicit, I couldn't put them on the screen. I'm not joking. It's crazy. So this is one, though, where the handle is meant to look like Hercules' club, and then they would actually etch on these. So you would look in the mirror, you're holding Hercules' club, you look at yourself in the mirror, and they would etch on these a picture of a god or goddess next to that. So when you looked in the mirror, you saw yourself among the gods, right? This is me among the gods. And so there's this little fiction that was going on, like, this is me, the gods are all around me, and when I look in the mirror, I actually see it, is the idea. Now, Paul might be referring to that. Some scholars think he is, or he might just be referring to the fact that when you look at an image, it's not the same as looking at a person face to face. An image and a person are different. Either way, the point is clear. It's partial knowledge. It's partial knowledge. That in this life right now, what we see, the way we see God in our lives, it's incomplete. But now these three things remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. So how do we know what is real? The Apostle Paul says, it's love. It's love. The application is really, really simple. He starts and ends this way. At the beginning, he says, I want to show you the higher way, the way of love. And then here he says, follow, literally run after the way of love. How do we know what is real? Can I just say, if you're looking for a brain scan to say, now this person has real faith and this person doesn't, I don't think you're going to find it. There are no scientific instruments. There are no magic mirrors you can look into to see whether God's with you or not. Those things do not exist. The only measure we have is love. And Jesus is the measure of love. How do we know what love is? That Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. So if you're looking for like a scientific proof or like a mathematical proof about is my faith real, this is going to be really disappointing. But this is the type of proof that God gives us. He gives us the proof of like, how do you know your Father loves you? Right? And so he tells us a story. He says, well, imagine there's a father, and the son hates his father. I mean, hates him, despises him, says, I wish you were dead. I take everything you have, and I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here, getting out from under your rule as fast as I can. And he takes his inheritance and runs off to a faraway country to do what he wants to do, live the life that he wants to live. And then he runs out of money. And he goes to total ruin. And he's starving. And he's already rejected, spit upon, hated his father. But he knows that his father's kind enough, good enough man, that if he goes back, he might be able to come back as a slave, as a servant. And so he says, I've got to do it. I've got to do this. I'm going to die where I'm at. So he starts heading home. And it says, while he was still a very long way off, his father saw him. His father was looking for him. And he didn't wait for him to come. He didn't wait for him to say sorry. He goes and he runs after him. He scoops him up. He says, put a coat on him, put a ring on his finger, slaughter the calf. We're going to have a party. My son was dead, and now he's alive. And Jesus says that's how the son knows that the Father loves him. That's the proof you get. How do we know that our spiritual experience is true? Because Jesus ran after us. Like his unlimited patience with us, his kindness that leads us to repentance, the fact that he sacrificed everything for us, the fact that he always covers us, he always believes, always hopes. He will sit in suffering, sit under with us in our suffering. He will never leave us, never forsake us, always loves us. His love is the proof. It's the only proof we'll ever get, and it's the only proof we'll ever need. Father, I pray, Lord, that we would see your love, see how you've run after us, and we would run after you. Those final words of Paul, to run after love, to follow the way of love. God, I pray that list would not just penetrate our hearts, that list of what love does. It wouldn't just penetrate our hearts, Lord, but it would shape our lives. God, I pray that we're not just a people who are trying to create our own way or create our own meaning, but we really bask in your love, bask in who you say we are. And God, I want to pray especially for those who this sounds so foreign to them, and they're outside of this today, and they're just sitting there looking at, we're talking about this ancient Jew who we believe is God, and it sounds weird. God, I pray that, I know this is such a process. God, I pray that you just give them a taste of your love today, through your people, through these words, in a non-verbal, experiential way. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.